Welcome to topic 4.3, how we pick our presidents. The goal for today is for you to be able to walk away being able to describe how we actually elect our presidents. And a quick spoiler here, it's not as simple as just whoever gets the most vote wins. Well, that's true, it's not the votes you think. So let's start with that key question here. How do we exactly pick our presidents in the first place? It's not a coin flip. To understand this, you have to understand the difference between direct and indirect elections. Those are two different types, right? So direct elections are when voters vote directly for who they want to hold office. So for instance, the House of Representatives and the Senate are both directly elected. That means when you cast your vote for a senator in an election, you're saying, I want this person to be the senator. When you're casting a vote for someone to be a member of the House during an election, you're saying, I want this person to be the member of the House that represents my district. That's a direct election. Side note here, the Senate has only been directly elected since 1913 when we changed the Constitution with the 17th Amendment, which said we can directly elect our senators. Before that, the state governments got to decide who the senators were, but we want to give people more direct control over the federal government, so we changed that in 1913 with the 17th Amendment, saying we can now directly elect our senators. Indirect elections are a little bit different. You can think of this like the way we create our laws. We don't directly vote on the laws. Instead, we vote for people who then vote on the laws on our behalf. That's an indirect election on how the laws are made. Indirect elections when it comes to candidates were kind of similar, right? Here, we're voting for people who then vote for who they want to hold office. These people are called the electors, and this is actually how we pick our presidents ever since we formed the government in 1789. When you cast your ballot for president, you're actually casting your ballot for electors who will then go to pick the president at the Electoral College, which is where they actually pick the president. I know, confusing, anti-democratic, kind of actually, but we'll go through why we do it this way in a little bit. Another spoiler alert, I really don't like the Electoral College. In fact, no one does. So let's talk about electors. So electors, again, are the people who pick the President of the United States. The electors themselves are elected. They're selected by each state and Washington, D.C., which is not a state, it's a federal territory. So each state and Washington, D.C. get to pick a certain number of electors who then go to the Electoral College to vote. The number of the electors each state gets is based on a simple math equation. You take the number of members of the House that a state gets to elect, plus the 2 senators they get to elect, and that gives you the number of electors they get to pick, who then get to pick the president. So for instance, Wisconsin has 2 senators plus 8 members of the House, giving us 10 electoral votes for the president. That is, we get to select 10 people who will then go vote on our behalf who gets to be president. California has 52 members of the House and 2 senators, so they get to send 54 electors to the Electoral College to pick the president. So here you might say that states with larger populations have more control over who gets to be the president, which is kind of true, but kind of not. We'll get to that when we talk about swing states. Now, because of our federal system, each state gets to decide how they select these electors. Today, they all operate based on elections, but in the past, those electors could be picked by the governor. They could be picked by the state legislature. Today, every state holds their election for presidential electors on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November every 4 years. Now, because every state gets to pick how they pick the electors, that leads to some variation. In 48 of the states, these states let the candidate who wins more than 50% of the state's popular vote select all the electors from that state. What this means is that let's assume there are 1,000 people voting for president in Wisconsin. If you get 500 votes, that's 50% of the votes, plus 1 vote, then you get to pick all 10 people who will go to the Electoral College and then vote for president, and since you're picking them, they're probably going to vote for you. Maine likes to do things a little bit different because, again, federalism allows each state to make these election decisions for themselves. So Maine, for instance, has 2 electoral votes based on a statewide popular vote, and then they award 1 vote for each of the 2 congressional districts in Maine. So they have 4 votes for president. 2 of the votes are decided by whoever won the popular vote in the state, and the other 2 votes are based on whoever wins the popular vote in each of their congressional districts. Complicated? I know, but you might want to rewind and listen to that a couple times to make sure you really understand that, or come and ask questions. Nebraska awards 2 electoral votes based on the statewide national popular vote, but then they have 3 congressional districts where those votes are given to a candidate based on whoever wins the popular vote in that congressional district. So, in summary, 48 states give all their electoral votes to whoever gets more votes throughout their entire state. Maine and Nebraska only award 2 of their votes that way, and the other votes are based on who wins the popular vote in each congressional district within that state. Complicated, again, I know. I told you I really don't like the Electoral College. No one does. So, when you vote for a candidate for president in the general election, that's when most people think they're actually picking the president. What you're actually doing is voting on who's going to be allowed to pick the electors for your state. Those electors are the people who then actually elect the president. So originally, you were supposed to vote for electors by name on the ballot, but the laws have changed that, so instead of putting the name of the electors on the ballot, the states say, we're going to put the name of the candidates on the ballot, and you vote for the candidate you want to pick the electors. Again, it's a dumb system. No one likes the Electoral College. So once each state has picked their electors, then those electors will meet at their state's capitol buildings in December of the year of the election. This is known as the meeting of the Electoral College. The last meeting was on December 17th, 2024, where they cast their votes for President Trump and Vice President Vance. This is, again, where the electors cast their votes for president and vice president. This is where they actually pick the president. So when we vote, we're not voting for president, we're voting for the people who get to pick the president. That's an indirect election. Again, I hate this system. All right, let's talk about some of the problems that come from picking our president this way, other than the fact that we make teachers teach this to kids. It's horribly complex, and no one likes it, right? It creates some serious problems. One major problem is the concept of faithless electors. That is, electors who don't vote the way the state has told them to vote. So Wisconsin might say candidate A wins all 10 of our electoral votes, but one of those electors that are selected actually votes for candidate B in the Electoral College. We call that person a faithless elector. Right? So a more concrete example, let's say Trump wins the popular vote in Wisconsin, but one of those 10 electors voted for Kamala Harris. Again, that person who voted for Kamala Harris instead of Trump would be called faithless because they didn't vote the way the vote of the state told them to. Now, you might be thinking, is this legal? What can be done? What's going to happen to the faithless elector? Are they going to be thrown in jail? Is there a punishment for doing this? Well, in most states, no. There is no penalty for an elector voting the opposite way of the popular vote in their state. After all, what we're supposed to be voting for are the people that we trust to pick the president for us. So they're allowed to use their best judgment. However, in 14 states, they have laws that void out the votes of faithless electors, and if someone does do that, a faithless elector says they vote for candidate B instead of candidate A like they're supposed to, then the state law says their vote doesn't count, and a new elector will be picked who will vote the way they're supposed to. 2 states also have a fine for the electors. They actually have a monetary ticket they have to pay. You should know that Wisconsin has absolutely no penalty for faithless electors. Another serious problem with this system is that you can become the president with less than 50% of the vote. And again, this is complicated math that is going to it's just complicated math, right? So you only need 50% of the vote plus 1 vote to win all electors in 48 states. This is what makes it possible to win the Electoral College, but still have won less votes nationally than your opponent with the popular vote. This is because there's such giant population differences between all the different states. So you got to remember, it's the Electoral College that matters, not the national popular vote. And yes, this has happened in the past, actually in the quite recent past. In the year 2000, there was 2 candidates, the Democrat Al Gore and the Republican George W. Bush. Al Gore actually won 500,000 more votes than George Bush did. But because the way the Electoral College was set up, George Bush won 271 electoral votes, Al Gore won 267 electoral votes, so George Bush became the president, even though most people across America voted for Al Gore. And that's again because you need 270 electoral votes to become president. The popular vote nationally doesn't matter. The popular vote in each state matters, but across the country, it's just a nice number. This happened again in 2016 between the Democrat Hillary Clinton and the Republican Donald Trump. This time, Hillary Clinton actually got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. But again, because of the large population differences in the states and the way the Electoral College works, Donald Trump won 306 electoral votes. That's 36 more electoral votes than he needed, and so he became president of the United States, and Hillary Clinton did not. Then, of course, there's the question, okay, if you need 270 electoral votes to become president, what happens if no one gets 270 electoral votes? What if there are 3 candidates? They split their votes in such a way that no one crosses the 270 threshold. Again, this is where we just hate the Electoral College. So the way the rules go, it would go to the House of Representatives and they get to decide. Each state gets 1 vote. Wisconsin's 8 members will vote once together, 1 collective vote. And if 5 or more members agree that candidate A should be the president, then they get Wisconsin's 1 vote. But then again, what if the House can't decide? What if no one wins the majority of votes? After all, there are 50 states. What if it's 25 versus 25? What happens then? They just keep voting until someone finally wins. That's actually how the rules work. If it takes a couple hundred ballots, it's going to take a couple hundred ballots. Has this ever happened? Excellent question. Glad you asked. Yes, it happened in 1824 with the election of John Quincy Adams. I am personally not aware of another time it's happened, but not a U.S. history teacher, just a political theory teacher here. So yeah, it did happen in 1824 though. Okay, if this system is so awful and so complicated and no one likes it, why do we do it this way? First off, because the founders were afraid of mob rule. So they were afraid that if we had direct elections of the president, then most people would be too uneducated to actually vote for the right person for the job who would make important decisions. Essentially, they thought we weren't smart enough to directly elect the president. For instance, what would happen if the majority of people in the country wanted to vote for someone who was dangerous to our natural rights? Or what if someone just lied to us, telling us only what we wanted to hear for their own gain, and if the majority of people believed that, they would elect that person, who could then go on to, well, use the laws to benefit themselves and hurt the rest of us? What if the majority of people chose someone who's completely unqualified for office? Well, the Electoral College was supposed to be a safeguard for us against all this. They believed that we could, if we picked the best amongst us to then make the decision for us, that would be a safeguard to protect us from making bad decisions. If you think about it, this is pretty similar to Congress. How, you ask? Well, pause the video for a second here and see if you can figure it out. Because with the Electoral College, we're picking people that we think can make good decisions about who the president should be, and when we elect members to Congress, we're picking people who we think would make good decisions about what the laws should be. So in that way, it was supposed to mirror how we create our laws, right? Both are indirect elections. But the Electoral College has never once worked the way it was supposed to. In fact, 2/3 of all Americans, when asked how they think the president should be elected, think they should be elected based on the national popular vote. Only 1/3 of Americans want to keep the Electoral College, and frankly, I'm surprised that many Americans even know what the Electoral College is. So there are a couple different suggestions on how we could change this system. For instance, we could have a direct popular vote for elections. That's what 2/3 of Americans want. So we just pick the president based on whoever wins the most votes across the entire country. However, this would require a change to the Constitution, a constitutional amendment, and frankly, most people don't know enough about the Electoral College or care enough about it to actually put the effort into changing the Constitution, which would take quite a bit of work. In short, we're too lazy to do anything about it. Because in order to change the Constitution, 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate would have to agree to get rid of the Electoral College and move to a national popular vote, and then 3 out of every 4 states would have to agree to that change. Smaller population states would lose power, and they would likely not go for this. Another option is known as the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Very long, complicated name, and kind of a complicated plan, but also not as complicated as you'd think. So you remember that each state gets to decide for themselves how they award their electors? Well, under this plan, states would change their election laws and award their electoral votes to whoever wins the national popular vote. So instead of awarding the elector based on whoever wins the popular vote in the state of Wisconsin, we would give all 10 electoral votes to whoever wins the national popular vote for the entire United States. And because this wouldn't require a change to the Electoral College, because technically we'd still be picking electors, and the states would just be picking them based on the national popular vote, we wouldn't need to change the Constitution. Currently, 15 states and D.C. have all passed this bill, which totals 196 electoral votes. So not enough to actually change the outcome of the election or decide the winner. The laws passed in these states say it will only go into effect when the electoral votes from all of the states that have passed this bill equals 270. That is because 270 is the number of electoral votes you need to win the presidency. Currently, there are 16 more states considering passing this bill, which would put it over the top to make 270 electoral votes and make it go into effect. But we're still a long way from this actually happening. I'd like to note, Wisconsin is not even considering passing this bill currently. Why? Well, that's a little more complicated than I have time to get into in this video, because we're focusing on the presidency, not Wisconsin politics. You want to know more? Come stop by my room and ask. There we go, we've gotten to the end of the video, so as always, rewrite today's goal, identify 3 important facts from these notes that help you understand today's goal, and write at least one question you still have to help you get a better understanding of today's learning goal. Alright, I'll see you in class.